In this video, we will show you how to replace your front strut and coil spring assembly on this GMC Acadia. This is part of your front steering and suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Continuing from there, we're going to remove all of our 22mm lug nuts and then the wheel. With the wheel out of the way, we'll be paying attention to where the strut and the front sway bar link connect right here. There's an 18mm nut that's holding the sway bar link in place. To be able to remove this, I like to dislodge the ABS wire first. To dislodge this, you can use pretty much anything as a small prying device. I'm using a trim tool. I'm just going to make my way in between this area and the front strut and gently pry it out of place. We'll just give it a quick inspection, make sure everything is still reusable and the ABS wire is not damaged in any way. Now to remove the mounting nut, we're going to have to hold the stud of the sway bar link. Looking at the very tip, you can find a small hole, and that's just big enough for a 5mm Allen head socket to fit into. Sometimes you have to use an 18mm socket to at least break the nut free first. To remove the nut while holding this, I'm using an 18mm ratcheting wrench. Let's get this ABS wire out of the way. Let's get the nut off of here. Quick inspection, we'll set that aside. Remove the sway bar link from the front strut. A quick inspection of the area. Let's move along. Let's continue following the ABS wire down to where it connects onto the front strut. We'll just pry that out of place. I'm continuing on with my trim tool. A quick inspection of that. Once again, we want to make sure we cause no damage through that process. Let's pause on that and make our way down to the axle nut. To remove the axle nut, we'll be using a 36mm socket. If you find during the removal process that the entire thing wants to spin on you, you could carefully use a pry bar diagonally down to the ground, holding it in place, or you could have somebody else in the passenger compartment holding the brake pedal down. Let's remove the axle nut. A quick inspection of that and we'll set it aside. Let's use some penetrant in this area and continue on with a hammer and punch. We need to separate the axle from the wheel bearing. The axle makes its way through. You never want to hit the axle directly with a hammer because you could cause damage to the threading. Once you do have movement from this area, let's make our way along to where the strut connects to your steering knuckle. In this area, you're going to find two 18mm headed bolts that come through from the rear towards the front, and along the front you have an 18mm headed mounting nut for each of these bolts. We'll continue on to loosening the first bolt, leave it in there, fully remove the second bolt. A quick inspection, start it back on just a couple threads. Let's repeat the process down along the bottom mounting bolt. Quick inspection. We're starting this one on a couple threads as well. At this point, we're going to use some penetrant in the area. We have to tap on the nuts, gently driving the bolts out of position. What you're going to find is that the bolts are splined and they're held in, so you really can't spin the bolt head to remove these. You have to continue on by tapping them out of place. With both of those nuts started on there, a few good threads, we'll continue on with tapping on these bolts. Like I said, we want to drive them out rearward. This one's got some movement now. We've got movement there as well. Now, since this is broken free, you can either push it out of place, or you could lightly tap on it, but you want to be extremely careful not to cause any damage to any of the threading portion. If you do, you have to go ahead and replace the mounting bolts. This looks fine. We'll set it aside. Let's repeat the process for the bottom one. Now we can separate the steering knuckle from the front strut, but before you start taking anything apart, you really need to pay attention to where the axle is going to be pulling out of the wheel bearing. We need to make sure that the axle is pushing towards the vehicle and the knuckle is pulling away. I can see that axle shaft making its way through the bearing as I continue here. I want to be very careful not to cause any damage to our axle. At this point, you can either strap this in this position, or if you feel as though it'll stay, we'll just pause here and make our way up into the engine compartment. Bring this down under here. Strap it in. Let's make our way up into the engine compartment. Along each side of the vehicle, you're going to find your strut tower, and that's where you're going to find the upper mounting hardware. You'll find that you have three 13mm headed bolts holding this in place to the body of the vehicle. You're also going to find that you have two locating tabs that protrude up and through the body of the vehicle. There's one here next to the ground portion of the vehicle. There's one here next to the ground point, and then there's also one diagonally across right over here. With all that said, let's start removing the mounting hardware from the top, starting with the two rearward bolts first. For my second bolt, I'm going to remove it, a quick inspection, and then I'll just start it in a couple threads. Now it's time for our final mounting bolts, but keep in mind as you remove this, the only thing holding the strut in the vehicle will be the other mounting bolt that we had started in a couple threads. Continuing from here, we're going to have to carefully reach inside of the fender well to hold onto the front strut while reaching up inside the engine compartment to fully remove that final bolt, and then we can remove the strut from the vehicle. There it is, friend. Now it's time to install the brand new front strut assembly. Before you do so, remove the new mounting bolts from the top of the strut, apply some blue thread locker. Once you've completed that, we can get this strut into position and start in each of our three mounting bolts along the top inside the engine compartment. Continuing inside the engine compartment, we're only going to snug these mounting bolts. We'll pause before torquing them, reassemble everything else, get the entire weight of the vehicle back on the ground, and then we can torque each of these to manufacturer's specification. let's make our way back into the wheel well. Back in the wheel well, we'll make sure we apply some blue thread locker to our mounting bolts that hold the steering knuckle to the lower portion of the front strut. We'll remove the strap that we have in place, continue on by pressing the knuckle into place as well. But what we need to do at the same time as that is pay attention to our axle. We want to make sure that the shaft is making its way through the wheel bearing hub, coming out towards the outer portion of the vehicle here. Set this aside. I can see my axle shaft making its way through. Now we'll start aligning this. The mounting bolts will come through from the rear towards the front, and we'll start on each of those mounting nuts. Let's get the next one in there. We'll start on those mounting nuts. At this point, we're clear to snug these up. We're going to torque these to 74 foot-pounds and then an additional 45 degrees, which is essentially a quarter turn. They're snug. Let's torque them to that 74 foot-pounds. Now an additional quarter turn. Same process for the second mounting bolt. Now we can get the sway bar link into position. Slide it right on through there. We'll start on our 18mm headed mounting nut. To continue tightening this, we'll be using our 5mm Allen head socket and our 18mm ratcheting wrench. Let's tighten this up. We'll torque this to 74 foot-pounds. Let's resecure our ABS wire. Press that right in there. Now we'll secure the ABS wire up along this area close to the sway bar link. Just go ahead and press that right in. Double check, make sure it's secured in place. Now it's time to reinstall our axle nut. Before we do, apply some blue thread locker to the threaded portion of the axle shaft. Just a little bit will do. Reinstall the axle nut. A quick note about this, never use an impact tool to install an axle nut. You could cause serious damage to the wheel bearing and then you're going to have to replace it. We'll go ahead and tighten this with a hand tool, get it down closer to the ground, and we can torque it to manufacturer's specification. We've got this closer to the ground. To be able to torque this, I'm using a flat pry bar diagonally down to the ground. You can see I'm making my way across the lug studs, but I'm being extremely careful not to cause any damage to them. If you're using a small pry bar, you want to be careful you're not at an angle. That will cause damage. To torque the axle nut, first we're going to torque it to 244 foot-pounds. Once it's torqued to that, we're going to loosen it a quarter turn, and then retorque it to 199 foot-pounds. Now we'll reverse this a quarter turn. It's a little tight. We'll set our torque wrench to 199 foot-pounds. Retorque the axle nut. One last quick inspection in this area, and we'll reinstall our wheel. Start on all 6 of your 22mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out. Get the wheel safely back down on the ground, and we can torque each of these to 140 foot-pounds. With the wheel back on the ground, we'll be torquing these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. With the complete weight of the vehicle back down on the ground in the engine compartment, we're going to torque each of the 3 13mm headed bolts holding the strut to the body of the vehicle. The torque for these is 16 foot-pounds. Okay friend, we showed you how to install one side of your front struts. Whenever you do these, you do them as a pair. Go over and repeat the process on the opposite side of the vehicle. Once you've completed that, go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test. Listen for funny noises and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.